Sarah Mitchell never thought of herself as a hero, but on a cold, stormy night in Chicago, she brought home a tiny puppy left to die. And in doing so, she stepped into a world far darker than she could ever imagine. She was followed, threatened, and dragged toward the heart of a brutal dogfighting ring. Yet, the little life in her arms showed a courage bigger than fear itself, a courage that would change Sarah's life forever. This isn't just a story about rescuing a dog. It's a story about loyalty, healing, and how one small heartbeat can bring someone back to life. Stay with us, because sometimes the smallest creatures hold the greatest strength. Chicago had a way of making winter nights feel heavier than they really were. The rain that evening wasn't dramatic or violent. It was a soft, endless drizzle that soaked into everything, seeping through coats, shoes, and even moods. Neon lights from corner diners bled into puddles on the sidewalk, and passing cars splashed water against brick walls darkened by years of storms. It was the kind of night people hurried through, eyes down, shoulders hunched, desperate to get home and close the door on the cold. Among the crowd, Sarah Mitchell walked alone. At 32, she had the kind of presence that didn't demand attention, but left an impression all the same. She was tall and slender, about 5'8", with soft brown hair that brushed just past her shoulders and a scattering of freckles across her cheeks. Her green eyes, once bright with ambition, now carried the quiet, distant look of someone who'd weathered more than a few storms of her own. Sarah wasn't bitter, though. If anything, life had simply taught her to expect less and to keep moving forward. She lived alone in a modest apartment on the city's west side, where the walls still held echoes of the life she used to dream of. Years ago, her world had been full of plans: marriage, a family, a cozy little house in the suburbs. But then cancer took her mother far too soon, and the man she thought she'd spend forever with, decided forever, wasn't in the cards. After that, Sarah built walls around her heart, relying on routine to keep herself steady. Work, home, dinner, sleep, repeat. It was a quiet, lonely rhythm, but it was safe. That night, she left work a little later than usual. The department store where she designed window displays had been preparing for the holiday season, and Sarah had stayed behind to make sure every wreath and ribbon was in place. By the time she stepped off the bus, the rain had been falling for hours. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and tucked her hands into her pockets, the cold biting through the wool gloves she wore. She decided to take a quieter side street home, a shortcut she often used to avoid the crowded main road. The block was lined with aging brick row houses, their front steps slick and shining under the streetlights. A small convenience store glowed faintly at the corner, its buzzing "open" sign flickering like a stubborn heartbeat. Inside, Mr. Rahman, the store owner, was stacking cans behind the counter. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, with silver streaks in his hair and a kindness that always showed in the corners of his eyes. Sarah waved as she passed, and he gave her a polite nod in return. Then she heard it, a sound so faint she almost missed it. It wasn't the rumble of a passing bus or the splash of a car driving through a puddle. It was softer, sadder. A high-pitched whimper that seemed to rise and fall with the rain. Sarah stopped, tilting her head, trying to locate the source. There it was again, a fragile, desperate cry coming from the narrow alley between the convenience store and the next building. Something in her chest tightened. She hesitated, glancing around the empty street, then stepped toward the alley. The space was dark and damp, with trash bins lined up against the brick walls and water dripping steadily from a broken gutter above. And then, in the shadow of one of those bins, she saw it, a tiny, shivering puppy, no bigger than a loaf of bread, pressed into the corner as if trying to disappear. Its fur was matted and soaked, clinging to a frail body that trembled with cold. A faint white streak ran down the bridge of its nose, and its oversized ears flopped forward as it lifted its head to look at her. Its eyes, round, amber, and full of fear, met hers. And in that moment, Sarah felt something stir deep inside her. It had been years since anything had needed her, and yet here was this helpless little creature, barely holding on. "Hey there, little one," she whispered softly, crouching down to make herself small and non-threatening. The puppy whimpered again, shrinking back at first, but curiosity, or maybe desperation, pushed it forward. Inch by inch, it crawled closer, its belly scraping against the wet pavement. Sarah extended her hand, palm down, letting the tiny nose press against her skin. It was cold, colder than she expected, and trembling so violently she could feel it through her fingertips. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, her voice breaking just a little. She looked around, hoping to see someone searching for a lost pet. But the street was empty. There were no posters taped to nearby poles, no frantic calls echoing through the rain. Whoever had once cared for this puppy was nowhere to be found, if they ever cared at all. A man walked past the alley, tall and broad-shouldered, his construction boots splashing through the puddles. He glanced over, saw Sarah crouched in the rain, and paused. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice deep but kind. "I think so," Sarah replied. "He's just scared." The man gave a small nod, his expression softening. "You're doing a good thing," he said before continuing down the street. Sarah slipped off one side of her coat and created a small pocket of warmth beneath it. The puppy hesitated, then crawled toward the shelter, curling into the crook of her arm. Its tiny heartbeat fluttered against her chest. Without thinking, she scooped it up, surprised at how light it was, just skin, bones, and stubborn will. She pulled the coat tighter around both of them and started toward home. Each step felt strangely different, heavier and lighter all at once. The rain still fell, the wind still bit, but the world seemed to have shifted in some small, meaningful way. When she reached her building, she was greeted by Harold, her elderly neighbor from the second floor. Harold was in his 70s, thin and stooped but spry, with a white mustache and a habit of commenting on everything. "What have you got there?" he asked, peering curiously at the bundle in her arms. "A little stray," Sarah said with a small smile. "Found him hiding from the rain." Harold's eyes softened. "Good on you, Sarah. Most people would have just kept walking." She climbed the stairs. The elevator had been broken for weeks, and unlocked the door to her apartment. The familiar scent of lemon cleaner and the hum of the refrigerator greeted her, but the place felt different now, somehow less empty. Sarah laid the puppy gently on a folded towel on the couch. It was shivering uncontrollably, so she grabbed a dry cloth and carefully patted its fur, whispering soothing words the whole time. The little creature relaxed under her touch, letting out a small sigh as if surrendering to the safety it had found. Once it was mostly dry, she wrapped it in a warm blanket and placed it in a soft nest she'd quickly made with a few spare pillows. The puppy curled up, its tiny chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. Sarah sat back on the edge of the coffee table, watching quietly. Something inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time, stirred awake. Maybe it was purpose, maybe it was hope, or maybe it was the simple, undeniable instinct to care. She reached out and gently stroked the puppy's damp fur. "You're safe now," she whispered, more to herself than to the little soul already sleeping. Outside, the rain continued to fall, But inside, for the first time in years, Sarah's apartment felt warm. Alive, even. She didn't know it yet, but that night, with a single impulsive act of kindness, her life had changed forever. Morning light seeped through the thin curtains of Sarah Mitchell's apartment, painting pale gold stripes across the living room floor. The rain from the night before had cleared, leaving the city wrapped in a cool, crisp calm. The usual silence of Sarah's mornings, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of pipes, felt different now. There was a new rhythm beneath it all, the gentle sound of soft breathing coming from a blanket nest on the couch. The puppy was still asleep, curled into a tight little ball, its tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, comforting rhythm. Sarah sat on the floor beside it, cross-legged, a cup of tea cooling between her hands. She watched the small creature as if trying to memorize every detail. The damp fur had fluffed up overnight, and the faint white streak down its nose seemed more visible in the morning light. Its paws twitched occasionally, as if chasing something in a dream, and Sarah felt her heart swell. It had been years since anyone, or anything, had shared her space. The apartment, once cold and still, now felt like it had a pulse. She caught herself smiling, an expression that had become rare since the days of heartbreak and loss. By mid-morning, the puppy stirred, stretching clumsily before lifting its head. It blinked groggily, then fixed its round amber eyes on her, and for a moment it just stared, as if trying to decide whether to trust the world again. Sarah leaned closer and smiled. "Good morning," she whispered. "Welcome home." She had promised herself she wouldn't get too attached, but promises like that were never meant to be kept. Within an hour, she had rummaged through her linen closet to find an old towel to use as a makeshift bed, and then she was online, ordering puppy food, bowls, and a soft toy shaped like a koala. It wasn't long before she found herself talking to the puppy as she moved around the apartment, narrating her chores, commenting on the weather, even asking questions she knew would never get answers. And though the apartment remained silent, it no longer felt empty. Over the next few days, the little dog followed her everywhere. It padded after her into the kitchen, napped under the coffee table while she worked on new design sketches, and curled up beside her at night, pressing close enough that she could feel its warmth against her ribs. The loneliness that had once defined Sarah's life began to loosen its grip. The walls that had felt like a cage now felt like a home. One rainy afternoon, as Sarah gently brushed the puppy's fur, she noticed something that made her breath catch. Along the back of its hind leg, beneath the fluff, was a thin, jagged scar, red and raw-looking despite the days that had passed since she found it. It wasn't the kind of wound a stray would get from wandering the streets. It looked deliberate. Her stomach tightened. She stroked the puppy's back to soothe it, but her mind was already racing. Someone had done this. Someone had hurt this tiny creature on purpose. The thought was unbearable. The next morning, Sarah wrapped the puppy gently in a soft towel and placed it in a worn-out canvas tote. The sun was out again, bright and gentle after days of rain, and the walk to the vet's clinic just 3 blocks away felt heavier than it should have. She stopped outside the small white building with its blue awning and took a deep breath before stepping inside. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. Behind the reception desk sat Emily Carter, a warm-faced woman in her late 20s with curly blonde hair pulled into a loose bun and a cheerful Australian lilt in her voice. "Oh, look at this little one," she cooed, peeking into the tote. "Poor baby looks like he's had a rough go of it." "Yeah," Sarah murmured. "I found him a few nights ago. I think he's hurt." Emily gave her a reassuring smile. "Dr. Patel will take good care of him. She's the best." Moments later, Dr. Meera Patel entered the exam room. A woman in her early 40s, she had dark, wavy hair pulled back neatly and kind, observant eyes behind a pair of square glasses. There was a calm confidence about her, the sort that came from years of treating every creature from pampered house cats to injured wildlife. She greeted Sarah with a gentle handshake before turning her attention to the puppy. "Let's have a look at this brave little guy," she said softly, her accent carrying traces of both Sydney and Mumbai, the product of an upbringing split between two worlds. Sarah held her breath as Dr. Patel examined the puppy carefully. She checked its ears, teeth, and heartbeat, murmuring softly to keep it calm. But when she reached the scar on its leg, her expression shifted. Her brows knit together as she gently probed the wound with gloved fingers. "This isn't from an accident," she said finally, looking up at Sarah. "The edges are too clean, and the depth is too consistent. It's likely caused by a human, maybe a sharp object or some kind of restraint." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "So, someone hurt him?" Dr. Patel nodded sadly. "I'm afraid so. It's not uncommon. Some people are cruel, and small dogs like this one are often abused or neglected before being dumped. The good news is he's young, resilient, and this wound should heal well with the right care." She handed Sarah a small bottle of antiseptic spray and a course of antibiotics. "Clean it twice a day and give him 1 dose with food in the morning. And keep an eye on his behavior. Dogs that have been mistreated can take time to trust again." Sarah thanked her quietly, her heart heavy as she tucked the puppy back into the tote. On the walk home, she held it a little closer, whispering softly, "I'm sorry, little one. I promise you'll never be hurt like that again." Back in the apartment, Sarah set up a cozy spot by the heater, a soft bed, a water bowl, and a small dish of food. The puppy ate slowly, tail wagging hesitantly, and when it finished, it crawled into her lap and rested its head on her knee. She stroked its fur gently, the weight of the vet's words still lingering. Someone had once seen this little life as worthless, but to her, it was everything. That night, as rain began to fall again outside, Sarah sat on the couch with the puppy curled beside her. She thought about the last few days, how much had changed in such a short time. Just a week ago, her apartment had been a quiet, empty place she returned to only because it was where she slept. Now, it was a home filled with small sounds, tiny footsteps, and a beating heart that wasn't just her own. She hadn't named him yet. Part of her was still scared too. Naming things meant they mattered, that they were staying. But as the little dog sighed softly and nudged closer in its sleep, Sarah realized the truth. He wasn't going anywhere, and neither was she. The week after the vet visit unfolded with a comforting rhythm. The little dog, still unnamed, was growing stronger by the day. The wound on his leg was healing well under Sarah's careful tending, and his once timid behavior had begun to melt away. He followed her around the apartment with an almost childlike attachment, tail wagging at every glance, curling beside her each night as though afraid the world might separate them again. Sarah found herself laughing more, talking more, and, for the first time in years, looking forward to coming home. But even in this small pocket of warmth, a quiet unease had begun to stir. It started as a sense of obligation, a thought that maybe someone, somewhere, was searching for this dog. Despite everything the vet had said, Sarah couldn't shake the idea that posting a notice online was the right thing to do. After all, if there was a kind-hearted owner out there, they deserved a chance to reunite. On a chilly Tuesday morning, she took a few photos of the puppy playing on the rug, his clumsy paws slipping on the polished floor, his big ears flopping like sails, and uploaded them to a local community forum. "Found this puppy near Palmer Street a week ago," she typed. "No collar, no tag, Please message me if you believe he belongs to you." At first, the responses were exactly what she expected. Likes, comments thanking her for rescuing him, even a few offers to adopt him if no owner came forward. But by the next evening, the tone changed. A message arrived in her inbox with no name, no profile photo. The words were cold and deliberate. "Walk away now. This isn't your problem." Sarah read it twice, her heart thudding. She tried to dismiss it as some internet troll, but the unease wouldn't leave. Then another message followed. "Leave the dog where you found it. Last warning." A chill crept up her spine. This wasn't a random stranger. Someone clearly knew about the dog and wanted him gone. She deleted the messages but couldn't stop thinking about them. That night, sleep was elusive. Every creak of the pipes, every sound from the street made her flinch. The next morning, she noticed something else. A dark blue sedan parked across the street from her apartment. It hadn't been there before. At first, she brushed it off. Maybe it belonged to a neighbor or someone visiting. But the following day, it was there again. And the day after that, too. By the fourth day, she was certain. The car wasn't just parked. It was watching. Sarah tried to ignore the knot tightening in her stomach. She kept her curtains closed, avoided going out except for work, and held the puppy a little tighter at night. But no matter how much she tried to convince herself otherwise, the world outside her door no longer felt safe. 3 days later, a knock echoed through the apartment. It wasn't the polite, rhythmic kind. It was sharp, purposeful, like a demand. The puppy lifted his head and whimpered. Sarah's pulse quickened as she approached the door. She peeked through the peephole and froze. Standing in the hallway was a man she had never seen before. He was in his mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, his stance deliberate and unyielding. His dark hair was cropped close, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a square jaw. There was a hardness in his deep-set eyes, the kind that spoke of someone used to getting what he wanted. He wore a black leather jacket over a faded gray t-shirt, and his hands, scarred and rough, rested casually in his pockets, as if he had all the time in the world. Sarah hesitated but finally opened the door a cautious few inches. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear tightening her chest. The man's gaze swept over the apartment before landing on the small dog sitting quietly by her feet. "Yeah," he said flatly. "That's my dog." Sarah blinked. "Yours?" "Yeah, been looking for him for weeks. Thought I'd never see him again." His smile was thin, forced, and utterly unconvincing. "If he's really yours," Sarah said carefully, "then you can tell me his name." The man paused, just for a second, but long enough for the lie to show. "Buddy," he said finally. The puppy whimpered softly and shrank back behind Sarah's leg. "That's strange," she replied, folding her arms. "He doesn't seem to recognize that name." "He's been through a lot," the man said quickly, irritation creeping into his voice. "Probably just confused." Sarah's instincts screamed at her that something wasn't right. "Do you have any vet records? Papers? Anything that proves he's yours?" The man's jaw tightened. "I don't carry paperwork around," he snapped. "I just came to get my dog." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, her voice firmer now. "I can't hand him over without proof." A long silence followed, heavy and tense. Then the man leaned closer, his voice dropping into a low growl. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into." Sarah didn't move. She held his gaze, refusing to let him see how scared she was. After a few more seconds, he stepped back, a cold smirk twisting his lips. "We'll be back," he said softly, before turning and walking down the hall. Sarah closed the door quickly and locked it, her hands trembling. She slid down to the floor, the puppy climbing into her lap as if sensing her fear. She held him close, her heart racing. This wasn't just about a lost pet anymore. Someone wanted this dog, and they were willing to threaten her to get him back. That night, Sarah barely slept. She checked the locks 3 times, peered through the blinds every half hour, and jumped at every sound from the hallway. The blue sedan was still there, parked exactly where it had been all week. Its tinted windows gave nothing away, but she could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching her. For the first time, Sarah considered calling the police. But what would she say? That someone had messaged her online? That a man had come to her door with a claim he couldn't prove? It all sounded flimsy until she looked down at the tiny creature curled against her chest. Then it felt like the most important thing in the world. She whispered into the dark, more to herself than to anyone else. "I'm not letting them take you." Days passed, but the tension didn't ease. If anything, it grew. The sedan remained. Anonymous messages trickled in, and with every passing hour, the air around Sarah's small apartment seemed to tighten. The turning point came one evening when she caught a shadow moving just beyond the edge of the streetlight outside her window. It was there for only a second before disappearing into the darkness, but it was enough. The truth hit her like a punch to the chest. This wasn't random. It was deliberate, organized. And the little dog sleeping peacefully on her lap was at the center of something far darker than she had imagined. The days after the stranger's visit passed in a blur of fear and unease. Sarah barely slept, jumping at every sound from the hallway, every shadow cast by passing headlights. The blue sedan was still there, parked across the street like a silent sentinel, and every time she looked out the window, she felt eyes watching her. The messages had stopped, but the silence was worse. It felt like the calm before something much darker. One rainy afternoon, after nearly a week of this growing tension, Sarah sat on the couch with the little dog sleeping in her lap. His warm body rose and fell steadily against her legs, but her hands were trembling. Enough was enough. This had gone far beyond anything she could handle alone. She reached for her phone, took a deep breath, and dialed the local police station. "Hello, this is Constable Harris. How can I help you?" The voice on the other end was calm and steady, the kind that belonged to someone who had seen worse and learned to stay composed. Sarah explained everything: the anonymous messages, the car outside, the man who had come to her door claiming the dog was his. Her voice shook at times, but she pushed through it. By the time she finished, Harris's tone had changed from polite to serious. "We're sending someone over," he said. "Please stay inside and keep your doors locked." Within half an hour, 2 uniformed officers were at her door. One was Constable James Harris, a man in his late 30s with a broad, solid frame, and the kind of rugged features that came from years on the job. His dark hair was cropped close, and a faint scar traced along his left cheek. A souvenir, he explained later, from a knife fight he had broken up early in his career. Despite the hardened exterior, his voice carried a quiet warmth, the reassurance of someone who believed deeply in protecting people. The other was Detective Amelia Reed, a tall woman in her early 40s with sharp blue eyes and an analytical gaze that missed nothing. Her blonde hair was cut short in a no-nonsense bob, and she wore a fitted blazer over a crisp white shirt. Amelia's presence was commanding, but her tone was gentle when she spoke, like someone used to calming frightened witnesses. They sat with Sarah in the small living room, taking notes as she went over the details again. The dog, still unnamed, sat curled beside her, watching the strangers with cautious curiosity. When Sarah finished, Amelia exchanged a look with Harris before leaning forward. "Ms. Mitchell," she said carefully, There's something you need to know about this dog." Sarah's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "This isn't just a lost pet," Amelia continued. "We believe this dog was part of an illegal dog fighting and gambling operation that's been running in Melbourne's western suburbs. It's a large, organized ring, one we've been investigating for over a year. And based on the injuries, the lack of a microchip, and the way you've been targeted, we're almost certain he was involved." Sarah stared at them, stunned. "Dog fighting? You mean people make dogs fight for money?" Harris nodded grimly. "It's brutal. They take in strays or steal pets, train them to fight, and place bets on the matches. Some dogs are used for breeding, others for bait. If this one has a scar like you described, there's a good chance he was either being prepared for fighting or used to train other dogs." The room seemed to tilt around her. The idea that this gentle, trembling creature in her lap had come from a world of violence and cruelty made her stomach turn. She stroked his fur, and he lifted his head to look at her, eyes soft and trusting, as if none of that horror had ever touched him. "Why are they after him?" she asked quietly. "Because he's evidence," Amelia replied, "and because he's valuable. If they were training him for a specific purpose, they'll want him back. Or if they think he could expose them, they might try to make the problem disappear." Sarah swallowed hard. "So what do I do now?" Harris and Amelia exchanged another glance before Amelia spoke again. "We're going to ask you for something difficult, and you're free to say no. But we believe this dog could help us bring the entire operation down." Sarah frowned. "How?" "We want you to keep him," Amelia said, "to act as if nothing has changed. We'll have officers monitoring the area, plainclothes, unmarked vehicles, the works. If they come back for him, we'll be ready. We'll follow them, build a case, and hopefully make arrests." Sarah's eyes widened. "You want me to use him as bait?" "Bait is a harsh word," Harris said gently. "But yes, that's essentially the idea. We believe they're watching you. If they think the dog is still here, they'll try again. And when they do, we'll be waiting." Silence hung in the room. Sarah looked down at the little dog, now dozing peacefully in her lap. The thought of putting him in danger, of putting herself in danger, made her chest tighten. And yet deep down, she knew the officers were right. If she walked away now, those people would keep doing this. More dogs would suffer. More lives would be destroyed. "I'm scared," she admitted softly. Amelia nodded. "That's normal. But you won't be alone. We'll be watching, and we'll make sure nothing happens to you or to him. And if at any point you change your mind, we stop. No questions asked." Sarah took a deep breath, her hand resting gently on the puppy's back. In the weeks since she had found him, this tiny, fragile life had become her anchor. The reason she got out of bed, the reason she smiled again. Maybe he needed her, but maybe she realized now she needed him even more. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll do it." Harris offered a small nod of respect. "Good. That's brave. Of you." They spent the next hour going over details. An unmarked police vehicle would park on the street, watching the building. Officers would rotate shifts, keeping an eye out for suspicious activity. Sarah was instructed to go about her life as normally as possible, go to work, run errands, post online about the dog if she wanted. Anything that would make it seem like she had no idea she was being watched. Before they left, Amelia handed her a card with a direct number. "Any sign of trouble? Call me, day or night." After they were gone, Sarah sat alone in the quiet apartment. The weight of what she had agreed to pressed down on her, heavier than anything she had felt in years. Outside, rain began to fall again, tapping against the windows like a reminder of the night this all began. The puppy stirred and climbed into her lap, curling into a small, warm ball. She held him close, burying her face in his fur. "We're in this together now," she whispered, "and I'm not letting anyone hurt you again." Somewhere out there, people were profiting off cruelty. Somewhere, more dogs like this one were suffering. And though the fear was real and sharp, something stronger had taken root in Sarah's heart, a purpose she hadn't felt in a very long time. The days that followed the police visit were unlike any Sarah Mitchell had ever known. Everything in her life now had an edge, a low, humming tension beneath the surface of the ordinary. Every time she stepped outside, she scanned the street for unfamiliar faces. Every time she came home, she double-checked the locks. But most of all, she paid attention to the dark blue sedan still parked across the road, its windows tinted and its engine always silent. It had become a part of the landscape, a chilling reminder of the danger that lurked just out of sight. The police kept their word. Unmarked cars appeared and disappeared at odd hours, and Sarah noticed plainclothes officers pretending to walk dogs or wait for buses near her building. Detective Amelia Reed called every few days to check in, her voice calm and steady, always reminding Sarah that she was not alone. Still, the knowledge that she was being watched, and that someone out there wanted the little dog back, was a constant weight on her chest. Through it all, the puppy remained her anchor. His leg was healing well now, and his playful energy filled the apartment with warmth. He had grown more confident too, exploring every corner of the flat, tugging on Sarah's socks as she got ready for work, and curling up beside her at night with a contented sigh. But it wasn't just his presence that comforted her. It was the way he watched her, always alert, always aware. It was as if he understood that they were in this together. One night, just over a week after she had agreed to work with the police, Sarah woke to a sound she couldn't immediately place. It wasn't the usual creak of the building or the distant hum of traffic. It was sharper, closer. A faint metallic click, followed by the slow groan of hinges. Her heart lurched. She slipped out of bed quietly, her bare feet barely making a sound on the cool wooden floor. The apartment was dark, illuminated only by the pale silver light of the moon spilling through the window. The little dog stirred from his bed at the foot of the couch, his ears perked and his body tense. Then came another sound, the unmistakable thud of a footstep on her living room floor. Someone was inside. The air in her lungs froze. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, hands trembling, and dialed 000. The operator's voice was calm, professional, telling her to stay quiet and stay where she was. But before she could answer, a shadow moved past the doorway. The man who stepped into view was not the same one who had come to her door before. He was taller, easily 6'2", with a heavy, muscular build that filled the narrow hallway. His hair was buzzed short, his neck tattooed with a coiled snake, and his thick beard was flecked with gray. His movements were slow and deliberate, like a predator who knew he had the upper hand. Behind him was another man, shorter and wirier, with narrow eyes and a sharp, angular face. He wore a dark hoodie pulled tight around his head, and his hands were gloved. His movements were jittery and quick, betraying a kind of restless impatience. They whispered something to each other. She couldn't make out the words. And then they started moving deeper into the apartment. Sarah's heart pounded so hard she thought it might give her away. But before she could react, a sound shattered the silence. A bark, loud, sharp, and fierce, so sudden it startled even her. The little dog had stepped into the hallway, his tiny frame rigid and trembling but standing between her and the intruders. His teeth were bared, his fur bristling, and he barked again, louder this time, defiant and unyielding. The larger man froze mid-step. "Shut that thing up," he hissed. But the dog didn't stop. He barked again and again, each sound echoing off the walls, filling the small apartment with noise. Sarah could hear footsteps from the hallway outside, neighbors stirring, doors opening, voices calling out. "Is everything okay?" someone shouted. The intruders exchanged a look, a flicker of hesitation that Sarah would remember for the rest of her life. The smaller one cursed under his breath. "We've got to go," he muttered. "Not yet," the bigger man growled, stepping forward. But just then, a distant siren wailed, faint at first, then growing louder. The dog lunged forward, barking with a ferocity that seemed impossible for a creature so small. The men swore again and bolted. Sarah heard the front door slam, then the pounding of boots on the stairwell. Within seconds, they were gone, swallowed by the night. Sarah's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, shaking, the phone still clutched in her hand. The dog trotted over to her, his tail wagging, his chest heaving from the effort of his defense. He pressed his head against her knee, whining softly as if to ask if she was okay. Tears she hadn't realized she was holding back began to fall. She scooped him into her arms, clutching him so tightly she was afraid she might hurt him. "You brave little thing," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're so much braver than I'll ever be." Minutes later, flashing lights filled the street outside. Officers stormed the building, knocking on doors and checking the hallways. Detective Amelia Reed was among them, still in plain clothes, her expression tense but controlled. "Are you hurt?" she asked as she entered the apartment. Sarah shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "They tried to break in. He stopped them." She looked down at the dog in her arms, who licked away one of her tears. Amelia's gaze softened. "Sometimes courage comes in small packages," she said quietly. "We'll find them, Sarah. I promise." The officer swept the apartment, dusting for prints and collecting evidence. A neighbor, Mrs. Margaret Hall, a retired nurse in her late 60s with short silver hair and a determined spirit, knocked on Sarah's door with a pot of tea and a blanket. "I heard the barking," she said. "Knew something was wrong. Called the police straight away." Sarah managed a grateful smile. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Margaret said with a firm nod. "Thank the little hero here." She scratched the dog gently behind the ears, and he wagged his tail despite the adrenaline still coursing through his tiny body. Hours later, after the police had gone and the apartment was quiet again, Sarah sat on the couch with the dog curled against her. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a deep, bone-level exhaustion. But beneath that, something new had taken root. She had spent weeks believing she was the one protecting him, saving him from the cruelty of the world. But tonight, as she replayed the image of his small body standing fearlessly between her and danger, she realized the truth was more complicated. He wasn't just a dog she had rescued. He was her protector, too. For so long, Sarah had lived behind walls of fear. Fear of being hurt, fear of being alone, fear of letting anyone in again. But with this tiny creature by her side, those walls were beginning to crack. He hadn't just saved her life tonight. He was saving her from herself, from the loneliness and emptiness she had carried for far too long. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, pressing her cheek against his fur. "For everything." The dog sighed softly, curling closer into her embrace. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt truly safe. The weeks that followed the break-in passed in a blur. Interviews, statements, and countless conversations with detectives. Sarah Mitchell's once quiet life had become a storm of police visits, courtroom preparations, and sleepless nights replaying the sound of splintering wood in her head. Yet beneath the exhaustion was something else. A deep, steady resolve. She had faced her fear, and she had not backed down, and neither had the little dog who now rarely left her side. Detective Amelia Reed became a familiar face at Sarah's apartment. She often arrived in the early morning, carrying a laptop bag and wearing the same dark blazer that matched her composed, no-nonsense demeanor. Amelia, in her mid-40s, had sharp, observant eyes, framed by chestnut hair tied back in a low ponytail. Years on the force had taught her to read people quickly, and behind her firm tone was a genuine compassion that made Sarah feel safe. She had grown up in a tough, working-class suburb, the daughter of a single mother, and had once nearly lost her life during an undercover sting, an experience that made her relentless about dismantling criminal networks. "Thanks to you, we have what we need," Amelia said one afternoon, sitting at Sarah's kitchen table with files spread out before her. The break-in, the anonymous threats, the surveillance footage, it all ties back to the dogfighting operation. Your testimony is the missing piece. Sarah stroked the little dog's fur as he dozed in her lap, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. "I didn't do anything special," she said quietly. Amelia smiled faintly. "You did more than you know." 2 weeks later, the operation unfolded. At dawn, over a dozen police vehicles descended on an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Inside, officers found cages stacked in rows, blood-stained floors, and evidence of illegal betting operations. More than 20 people were arrested, including several with long criminal histories. Among them was the tall man with the snake tattoo and the wiry one who had broken into Sarah's home. The news broke the next morning. "Major Dog Fighting Ring Dismantled," read the headline on every local site. As Sarah scrolled through the article, her chest tightened at the images, emaciated dogs being carried to safety, police leading suspects in handcuffs, and Amelia speaking at a press conference. It was over. At last, it was over. A week later, Amelia returned, this time with papers in her hand and a rare smile on her face. "It's official," she said, placing the documents on the table. "He's yours now, permanently." Sarah stared at the adoption certificate, her eyes blurring with tears. For weeks she had feared that someone might come to claim him, that the bond they had built could be ripped away. But now, it was real. He wasn't just the puppy anymore. He was Max, her dog, her family. Life began to change in ways Sarah hadn't expected. The tension that once sat heavy on her shoulders slowly dissolved. The blue sedan that had haunted the curb vanished. The threatening messages stopped. The shadows lifted. For the first time in years, Sarah allowed herself to breathe deeply without fear clawing at her chest. She started going for morning walks again, Max trotting proudly beside her on a bright red lead. He had grown stronger and healthier, his coat glossy and his steps confident. He was still small, no more than 12 kilos, but he carried himself with a kind of quiet dignity, as if he knew he had survived something extraordinary. People often stopped them on the street, smiling and bending down to pat him. Max soaked up the attention, his tail wagging furiously. Her neighbors noticed the change, too. Mrs. Margaret Hall, the retired nurse from upstairs, often joined them for tea in the courtyard. She had a sharp wit and a warm heart. And she adored Max, always bringing him homemade dog treats shaped like little bones. "He's good for you," she said one afternoon, watching Sarah laugh as Max chased a leaf across the grass. "You're lighter now, like you're finally living again." And she was. On weekends, Sarah started spending her afternoons at a nearby park, a wide, green space framed by towering gum trees and filled with the sounds of children's laughter and barking dogs. She had avoided places like that for years, afraid of feeling out of place, but with Max by her side, it felt different. It felt like she belonged. It was on one of those afternoons, as the sun dipped low and golden across the field, that Sarah truly understood how far they had come. Max was playing with a group of children, 3 girls and 2 boys, all between 5 and 8. They took turns tossing a worn tennis ball across the grass, and Max, tail wagging and tongue lolling, sprinted after it with joyful abandon. Each time he returned, the children erupted in giggles, patting his head and calling him the fastest little dog in the park. Watching from a weathered wooden bench, Sarah felt her chest swell with emotion. There had been a time, not so long ago, when she had come home to silence every night, when her apartment had felt more like a cage than a home, when she had convinced herself that this, the loneliness, the emptiness, was all she deserved. But now, as she watched Max race back to the children, her heart light and full, she realized that everything had changed. She thought of that rainy night when she had first found him, soaked, trembling, and alone beside a rubbish bin. She had believed she was saving him then, rescuing a small, broken creature from the cruelty of the world. And in a way, she had. But the truth was deeper than that. He had saved her too. He had filled her days with laughter, her nights with warmth, and her heart with purpose. He had taught her that love could be found in the smallest, most unexpected places, even in a pair of dark, trusting eyes staring up at her from the edge of despair. A small boy ran past and paused in front of her, his cheeks flushed and his hair sticking up in every direction. "Is he yours?" he asked, pointing to Max, who was now rolling on his back as the children scratched his belly. Sarah smiled, her voice soft but certain. "Yes," she said. "He's mine." The boy grinned and ran back to join the others. Max trotted over a moment later, panting happily as he climbed onto the bench beside her. He rested his head on her lap, his tail thumping gently against the wood. Sarah stroked his fur, her heart full. "I thought I was saving you," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the breeze. "But the truth is, you saved me." The late afternoon light wrapped around them like a warm embrace. And for the first time in a very long time, Sarah felt whole. Not because the danger was gone, but because she had found something worth living for. A reason to wake up. A reason to keep going. A family. Sometimes miracles don't arrive in bursts of light from the heavens. Sometimes they come on 4 paws, with muddy fur, tired eyes, and a heart that refuses to give up. Max wasn't just a stray dog Sarah found on a rainy night. He was God's gentle reminder that even in our loneliest, darkest hours, love can find us when we least expect it. Through his loyalty, Sarah learned that grace isn't always loud or spectacular. More often it's quiet, patient, and persistent. A divine whisper reminding us that we are never truly alone. In a world that often feels cold and chaotic, stories like this remind us of the power of compassion, second chances, and faith. If this journey touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the blessings, both big and small, that God has placed in your path. Maybe it's a wagging tail. Maybe it's a friend who shows up just when you need them. Or maybe it's the strength to open your heart again. If this story moved you, I invite you to share it with someone who could use a little hope today. Leave a comment below about a miracle you've witnessed in your own life, big or small. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate love, loyalty, and the quiet ways God works through everyday moments. And as you go about your day, may God bless you and fill your heart with courage, kindness, and the strength to keep believing. Because sometimes the smallest miracles carry the biggest messages.